to use this video to talk about Thomas the Tank Engine, but it's a funny thing. You don't talk about children's TV shows for ages, and then you end up talking about two at once. Because I'd left a somewhat off-the-cuff comment on a Kevin Logan video about She-Ra and some of the complaints that some people had about the, what would you say, rebooting, I suppose is the term that they use now, of the She-Ra character from the Masters of the Universe He-Man world, and it gave Kevin Logan a bit of a gotcha moment, I think, and I wouldn't want to deny Kevin his gotcha moment, which had effectively come about on two grounds, I suppose. One of the grounds was that I wasn't aware that they'd rebooted her as the 13-year-old character, you see, so then all my comments could be placed in that light. And it seemed that some people had a problem with the fact that it should be reimagined, and she didn't have the curvaceous figure she had before. So effectively then that's allowed him to make the same kind of comment. It's as if Jessica Rabbit was reimagined as a baby, and somebody had said, well, that's not really the Jessica Rabbit character, is it? Jessica Rabbit's known for a voluptuous figure and big tits, and he's gone, ha, so that's what you want. You want to jerk off to tits on a baby, do you? Because that's effectively what his argument amounted to. But he didn't seem to understand the argument that I had made, which wasn't necessarily related to tits, it was related overall. I looked up the new form, and it seemed that it had gone down the guidelines that we see more and more now, which is this idea that these unrealistic, unattainable beauty standards that girls are being held to with these role models, these non-existent role models. It doesn't matter whether it's a Barbie doll or something like that. If you look at the structure of them, they have like an unattainable physique, the length of the legs to the rest of the body, or the hip to waist ratio. You know, you can't attain, and it doesn't matter how many pizzas you shove down your throat, seemingly, right, that physique is not attainable, and that makes young girls very, very sad. But then at the same stage, how many times have people made the case, and the case that they actually use is He-Man, and they set He-Man alongside all these, they juxtapose He-Man as the archetypal standard that boys are sort of aspiring up to, and say, well, and it's true, you know, how much you need to sort of invest, you'd need the right physiology to begin with, you'd need to invest 10 years of your time, most of your fucking waking hours when you're not at work, and then periodize a course of anabolic steroids, human growth hormone and insulin if you were to try and even attempt to attain the physique of He-Man. And so I framed it in those things. Maybe we need to reimagine He-Man as something along the lines of Jarvis Cocker, but why not get rid of the other standards instead of using his fucking sword of Grayskull or whatever the fuck it is, right? Maybe he's just going to read poetry to them and solve all the issues in that kind of sense. But that gave Kev his gotcha. What was a little bit surprising there, I will say, I'll link you the video, it's worth looking just for this, is that in amongst the huge amount of vitriol and scorn that he pours onto me for various different things, which I had no problem with, and I found a lot of it very funny, was that once I'd made the Jarvis Cocker thing, he really got into what I can only describe as genuine ageism. It's like I'm supposed to feel guilty somehow or ashamed for being the age that I am, and that I ought to try and hide it in some way, like it's some hideous thing, you know, like I don't know, if I was gay and that had become clear or something, or if my ethnicity wasn't such as it is and that had come out, there was absolutely fucking no way. Even if really the comments are aimed at me, he would have laid into me over those things. But seemingly because it was on the grounds of age, ageism is a protected characteristic. Age is a protected characteristic that seemingly Kevin Logan thinks, no, that's fucking fair game. If somebody's old, right, you can tear them to fucking pieces on the grounds of that. That's a fucking disgusting thing to be. He's old. They ought to be ashamed of that. I'd really be interested in Kevin actually supporting his comments on that. But I'm not really interested. To be honest, I couldn't particularly give a flying fuck about She-Ra and He-Man and all that lot. It was just a passing comment on the way that these things seem to pan out between what are put up as sort of role models and for for men. And of course that is He-Man, the ultimate man in the universe, who uses his fucking sword to solve all the problems and to maintain his dominance with this impossible physique. And She-Ra, who's got an impossible physique, or had an impossible physique, and doesn't now. But there you go, it turns out she was 13, so gotcha plum, you're a pedo. But what I am interested in was Thomas the Tank Engine. And Tim, Demotivaotopinion, had made a video on this, and I wanted to talk about this because there have been some pretty sweeping changes on Thomas the Tank Engine, and this concerns me a little bit more because I quite like Thomas the Tank Engine and I watch it with my lad, and my lad likes Thomas the Tank Engine, so I wanted to talk about some of those changes, and they've been pretty wholesale changes. It turns out that Thomas the Tank Engine are working alongside the United Nations, and the new series started only a few weeks ago and we've been watching that. The new series breaks down into two halves. In the first half, Thomas does a bit of a tour of the world. It's one of these things that kind of shoehorned this in. So he does a tour of the world and brings in all these different cultures, etc. But even amongst the stock trains back in Sodor, they've increased the diversity of the trains. And they've also altered the fucking theme tune, which when you talk about these things, what they tend to have is a focus group, and they listen to the focus group, and then they make the new series or they make the changes based on the recommendations of the focus group, what people want. And it was really interesting reading about this and reading about, I think it was the producer talking about it and saying that the common thread throughout all the focus groups, which is everybody liked the theme tune, right? Different people had different problems with different things, but it seemed universally everybody liked the theme tune. He said, but we've changed it anyway. So you think, well, why don't you just do what the fuck you want and fuck what anybody thinks and fuck the focus group, right? If the one commonality that everybody liked was the theme tune, and you've gone and replaced a damn good theme tune that everybody liked with one that's shit, quite honestly, that I think was the worst bit for me. In terms of the changes that they made, they're a mixed bag, really. I spoke to my lad about it, asked him, he's nearly 4 years old now, he's 4 years in 3 months, and he likes some of the changes, he likes some of the new trains, and I must admit, really there's two main changes they did. They put more female trains on the as part of the Sodor train set, if you like, that are in the Tidmouth sheds, and then they've got this sort of diverse cast of ethnic trains. And in terms of the more female trains, actually I'm totally on board with that. Something I've always noticed watching Thomas the Tank Engine is that it's almost, I think there was only Emily, there was only like one female train there, and that always seemed a little bit lopsided to me, and maybe a sort of throwback to Reverend Audrey's original sort of understanding of it in those days. And not really justifiable. Some programmes I think it is justifiable. If you look at Paw Patrol, there's only one female puppy there and all the rest are male, and there are other casts like that where it's mainly male characters, but these are programs that you can see are mainly aimed at boys, and that's why, in the same way as if you looked at something like Shimmer and Shine, or if you looked at My Little Pony, all the main characters are female, right? Because that's a program that's aimed at little girls. I don't watch the Disney Channel, but I've watched a couple of the programs on there recently because that channel happened to be on when we put the Skybox on, and they're the same thing there. They're all princesses and they're all female characters because they're aimed at little girls, and that is why. But Thomas seems to be one that you would expect to be appreciated more generally, and so it seemed more reasonable to have a mixed cast. We're away from the original scripts of the Reverend Audrey, or whatever he's called, so that seemed absolutely fine by me, and probably a good move. And my lad liked it, right? My lad liked it, I liked it. The only issue I had, as I said on Tim Demotivator's Opinion, a channel, was that I would have liked to have seen some great big train tits there, you know, and we kind of missed out on that. But other than that, the female trains, I had no problem with. Where I didn't kind of was quite so on board was with the diversity thing, because it just seemed a little bit forced and unnecessary. Following the plots on Thomas, the kind of plots that you would get from diversity plots, they've covered anyway in ways which are much more sensitive to the nature of a fucking steam railway, which isn't a great... Steam trains don't go travelling all over the world, right? It's not an aeroplane. And they still covered a lot of these things. I mean, it's not as if they're all white trains, right? They're red and they're green and they're, you know, Thomas is blue, Henry is was it James that's red, and Gordon's green. They're different colours anyway, and they integrate, and the plots covered a lot of the issues. And in terms of, I suppose you could look at different cultures, you had the diesel shed there and the diesel trains, and there was friction between these which became resolved. Of course, if you watch the Thomas film Day of the Diesels, it becomes resolved, a lot of that. And yeah, so I thought those issues were tackled in a way that made a lot more sense for diesel trains than it does with the diesel trains than it does from having these trains around the world, which seems to be just a series. Somebody is bound to accuse them of cultural appropriation because they just put a load of bangles and fucking spangly bits and give it a mock Indian accent, and that's your Indian train, right? That's going to end badly, isn't it? Somewhere along the line, because you're not allowed to do that with non-white cultures. That's not acceptable to do that. That's racist. You put on a French accent or a German accent or something, that's okay. But doing it with an Indian accent or an African accent or something, you're on dodgy ground. But that's what they've had to do with regard to that. And it seemed a little bit unnecessary. But saying that, there are other reasons for doing things like that other than for some kind of forced social message. There's also the simple fact that it jazzes the programme up a bit, I suppose. And it's a kids' programme, and does it have to be realistic? Postman Pat, the most fucking mundane one of all, now has Postman Pat's special delivery service, where this fucking local postman has not just a helicopter, but an aeroplane as well, and delivers single packages on a fucking private jet aeroplane. What would the postage costs be to have a single parcel delivered? The Royal Mail nowhere delivers parcels in that manner, even on bulk, never mind individual fucking parcels. So I suppose you've got to take these things with a pinch of salt. Why did they do that in Postman Pat? Just to jazz the fucking thing up, really, and give themselves more plots. It doesn't have to be realistic, and I suppose you could say the same thing here. It allows them to bring in different things that, even if the plots are the same, right, that you don't realise they're the same because they've got a slightly different setting, I suppose. What I will note is he's not in the first half of this series, because the first half of the series is not set in Sodor, it's set around the world, but when it goes back to Sodor, the fat controller, Sir Topper Hat, is still there. And as part of the vanguard against the ultra-political correctness brigade, I suppose, they are at least still calling him the Fat Controller and not the Controller of Size. Maybe we'll have to wait for the next series before they make that particular change. Okay, that was my observations with Thomas the Tank Engine and She-Ra. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye.